mamas. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Wendy Bertagnole. She's going to be talking about supporting children with autism, ADHD, sensory disorder, and picky eating, and also how each of our sensory preferences affect the way we function, which is our ability to learn, sit still, focus, be patient, etc. And sensory processing is something that affects all kids, especially ones with a diagnosis, and is something parents can address without medication. Wendy, thank you so much for being here with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So obviously there are certain types of disorders that are a little more serious, like autism, ADHD, and other things like that. And you mentioned that you don't necessarily have to use medication. You have other methods that can help. You mentioned an occupational therapist. What are some other things that parents can do to help their kids?
First, I want to say I'm not against medication. And I think there is a time and a place for it. And I think it's such a wonderful thing to help when needed. I also feel like sometimes that can be the first resort. And so when it comes to sensory processing, if we can understand the way that our kids are interacting with the world and what their sensory needs are, we can address that specifically without medication. And so let's say, for example, we have a child who has ADHD. They're likely going to be more hyperactive. They don't focus quite as well. They can't stay on task, things like that. Well, the interesting thing is, if you understand their sensory preferences, likely they have a big proprioceptive cup. They need access to a lot of movement, a lot of deep pressure. Likely they might have small auditory cup. And so you can imagine this child sitting in a classroom and their body is just screaming, I need movement, I need movement, I need movement. And it's not tuning out background noise. Of course, that child is not going to be paying attention, and they're not going to be learning, and they're not going to be on task all the time because their body can't do it. So if we can address those things by giving them access to a little bit more movement more often, or giving them access to whatever it is that they might need to fill those needs, then when our sensory cups are all leveled out and they're all just right, what happens is we're not in fight or flight. So our brain can focus on learning, on communicating, on regulating emotions, on doing all those things that are higher level functions that are not going to happen when their cups are just crazy out of whack, underfilled, overfilled, all those things. So I always, no matter what the diagnosis is, I always start with the sensory preferences first and say, where are we working from? And how can we support this kid naturally in their own environment in a way that doesn't involve medication? It's fairly easy to do. You don't even have to do it with an occupational therapist if you can just start identifying those sensory preferences.
So if you have a child with ADHD, you're saying possibly before you take them to school or something, give them the opportunity to move and to do all the things to fill their cup up before they go to school, and then they'll be able to focus a little bit. Is that right?
They can. Yeah, it's not always that ideal, but absolutely they can. They might need a few more breaks during school, but 100%. So for example, my middle child, he doesn't have a diagnosis. He's in this crazy situation, which I think a lot of us moms find ourselves, where it's not enough for a diagnosis, but it's more than you would typically see. So his sensory preferences definitely interfere with daily life, but again, not enough for a diagnosis. So kindergarten was a nightmare for him. It was just horrible. The teacher couldn't understand why he was chewing on all the crayons, and he would never sit still, and he was just so active. And first of all, he's 5. Second of all, this is his first time in a school setting. So it was really tough that year figuring out what we could do, but definitely every single morning we would have him doing like bear walks, or walking up and down the stairs, or running up and down the stairs. Or if we could walk to school that day, that was even better, or riding our bikes, things like that. It really doesn't have to be a ton. And it doesn't have to be expensive. A lot of people think sensory processing and they think, oh, I need a weighted blanket, and I need a vest, and I need all the sensory fidgets. And that's not necessarily true. I have very few of those things in my home, because you can get a lot of that stuff with just movement or just knowing how to do it. So you don't have to make it an expensive process.
I love that. Obviously, Wendy, you know so much about this topic. What originally got you interested in sensory preferences?
Yeah, so I have my bachelor's degree in child development. So I've always started to look at behavior from a developmental perspective, like what's causing this behavior. But then I went on to get my master's degree in special ed. And I was teaching special education and dealing with children with with autism and Down syndrome and cerebral palsy and all the things, and dealing with the behaviors and all the things in my classroom. But then at home, I felt like we were just really falling apart. And there were some really tough behaviors that I just felt like I couldn't understand. And nothing that I was doing as a parent, I felt were working. It was so hard. It was, I guess I'm being vague here, but it was like my son was, he was always wanting to be outside. He was always wanting to be naked. He was always freaking out and melting down. And I just had no idea how to help him or how to support him or how to make him stop. Like there was so many times I was just like, just stop freaking out. And so that's when I started doing my own research, and I found sensory processing, and it described every single thing about my son. And I thought, every mom on the planet needs to understand this, not only to understand ourselves, like we were talking about, but also to understand our kids, because our kids don't understand their own bodies. We have to be the ones to teach them. And if we don't understand it, we can't empower them with that information. But when we do have that information, it's the difference between my son now, he's 10, and he can come to me and he can say, Mom, my body really needs to move right now. Or Mom, my body really needs some pressure. Or Mom, my ears can't take this. And I get it. I totally get it. Or Mom, my body doesn't like the way that these clothes feel. I need some different clothes, whatever it is. He can speak to it in that way rather than acting it out. And when we can empower our kids with that ability to do that, then they don't have to act things out all the time through behaviors or whatever it might be. So that's how I got into it.
I love that. I was going to ask you what you ended up doing with your son that loved to be naked and loved to do all these things, which sounds fairly normal. I'm not gonna lie, but I'm sure as the mom too, when it's excessive, you're like, this is too much. What did you end up doing to help your son?
Absolutely. It's been a process of a lot of different things. We didn't start occupational therapy until he was 6. So from the time he was 3 until he was 6, it was a lot of just doing what we needed to do at home. And for us, it looked like going to the park quite a bit, giving him time outside. And when we were inside, giving him access to ways that he could play to meet that proprioceptive need that he had. And so, for example, it meant changing some of the rules in our home. Like for us, couches and beds are for jumping. They just are, because changing that rule was a lot less stressful for me than dealing with telling him not to do it. And it's been fine for us. It's also been a matter of involving him in more of the decisions around his clothes. For example, I used to pick out all his clothes because I wanted him to wear certain things because I wanted him to look super cute. But I found that it's so much better for all of us if he can pick out his clothes that he feels comfortable in. And so he's more likely to wear them. He wears clothes now. It's fine. He doesn't run around naked. But he does have very specific, right? He does have very specific things that he likes to wear or doesn't like to wear. So a lot of it has just been educating him and then finding out what works for him. And then, now we do occupational therapy once a week, and it's a fun thing for him. It doesn't feel like work or weirdness or anything like that. But I would say it's been a process.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You mentioned you did a lot of research on your own. So if there's a mom, one of us that wants to know more about sensory preferences and all of this, what's a good resource to go to?
I like my own resources. Is that okay?
Perfect. Yes, absolutely.
I think because I've read a ton of books on sensory processing and parenting, and I put them all together. And the books on sensory processing are written for occupational therapists. And so they're written in very technical language. And it's taken me years to start to understand that. And so what I did is I've compiled what I know, and I've put it into little resources that are accessible to parents. And most of them are free. So you can go through it and determine what the sensory preferences are in your home for everybody, and what that looks like, and how you can support them at home without having to buy all the expensive things. So personally, I like my resources, but other than that, I really don't have any. That's a horrible answer.
No, that's not. That's a fantastic answer. So what is your website so moms can go check out all this stuff?
So right now I'm just on Instagram. So you can find me at Wendy Bertagnole on Instagram, and the link to the workbook in there is in there. It's free. You can access it at any time. You can, that's actually the only place that you can find me. Nope, that's not true. You can go onto the podcast app. Any podcast app has my podcast on it, where I did an entire series. I think there's 8 episodes on sensory processing and what it looks like for everybody. And you can find that in any app store or places where they have podcasts. And it's hold on, I just forgot the name of my podcast.
That's all right. That is okay.
Oh my gosh. It is the Exceptional Parenting Podcast. That's what it is.
The Exceptional Parenting Podcast.
Yes.
And I love that because I feel like you said, so many of these books are so technical and you're like, I have no idea what you're saying. So it's so nice for you to provide us with a resource that we can actually understand and implement into our own lives and our children's lives. So I think that's fantastic. So I feel like as parents, we are always looking at other people and thinking, like, I could look at you and say, oh my gosh, she has everything down pat. She's probably the best mom in the world, which I'm sure you are. But I feel like everybody has gone through, I don't know, a lot of different experiences to get where they're at and still make mistakes. So do you have any personal stories that you can share that you were maybe less than perfect and then you implemented this and then everything turned out okay?
Yeah, I think the first 3.5 years of my son's life are a really good example. And I look back to those times and it makes me want to cry just thinking about it. But I do remember multiple times where I was just laying on my couch crying because my kid was crying and freaking out. And I just had nothing else left in me. And I think a lot of moms can resonate with that. You know, you have a small baby and a small child, and it's exhausting and you feel like you're giving everything. And when you're giving everything, but it's still not helping your child, oh, that's such a horrible place to be in. So I feel like the first 3.5 years of his life were me trying to fix his behaviors and me trying to shape him into who I felt like he should be. And then I learned about sensory processing, and I learned it's not about shaping him into who I think he should be, but really supporting him to become who he can be by doing all the things that I can to help eliminate the things that are going against him. And supporting him so that he can function in the best way possible in whatever environment he's in. And I feel like I probably have a greater understanding of and respect for parents who are also in the trenches, whether it's challenging behavior or autism or whatever it might be. Any behavior can be challenging. So any parent in the trenches who's doing their best and finding themselves coming up short, I totally get it. And the more we know, the better we can do. And that doesn't mean we need to go research 5 bajillion books, but it means we need to follow our intuition, I feel. And when something feels like it's right, we keep going that direction, even if it feels like it might be kicking a little bit against the grain, it might be a little bit different. It's worth it.
I absolutely love that. What would you say would be your number one takeaway for our moms?
Trust yourselves. And don't worry about doing it perfectly. I love the theme of this conference because I don't feel like there's a one size fits all in anything when it comes to parenting. So I feel like, again, the more we know, the better we can do. And if we can just take what we know and apply it in a way that works for us and give ourselves that freedom to do it in a way that works for us, I think that's where we find the most patience, the most happiness, the most fulfillment in our job as moms.
I love that. Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. And I'm excited to implement all of this in my own life with my own kids. So I'm sure everybody appreciates it as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.